Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Amplify Girls two-part symposium series on Girls Agency. I am Anika Jindorothy. I'm the head of advocacy for Amplify Girls, and we're proud today to bring you this event that will be highlighting Girls Agency. Today's title is Girls Agency, a critical measure for girl success. Today's panel brings together a high-level sector of practitioners and community representatives working with and around Girls Agency in their program interventions and in their research. Despite coming from a wide range of sectors, that is health, education, economic empowerment, and more, global partners are recognizing the importance of Girls Agency as a critical cross-cutting skill. Now, with this panel of experts today, our ambition is to amplify the cross-sectional importance of Girls Agency and to drive investments to community-driven organizations working on developing Girls Agency. But first, how did the journey to measuring agency begin? To contextualize this journey is Margaret Butler, the head of Amplify Girls. Margaret brings to Amplify over 15 years of experience working alongside communities in Eastern Africa to support female leaders in her belief and commitment towards uplifting the voices of women to be agents of change in their communities. So Margaret, welcome. How did the journey to measuring agency begin?
Thank you, Anika. I'm very pleased to welcome everyone today. As Anika mentioned, my name is Margaret Butler and I'm the global head of Amplify Girls. In 2018, 18 organizations came together to talk about their vision of what collaboration and shared work could entail. Everyone had a common belief that collaboration was essential to shift the tide in global development, especially for community-driven organizations who are often seen as too small or insignificant when in fact, they are the ones delivering transformational change for adolescent girls. Following our first meeting together, we launched Amplify Girls with the vision of amplifying the voices, work, and impact of community-driven organizations investing in the agency of adolescent girls. We do this by providing our partners with world-class research tools, collaborative capacity building opportunities, and advocacy that puts them in a seat at the decision-making tables that have historically excluded them. In less than 4 years, we've developed a cutting-edge measurement tool to track girls' agency, supported programs reaching over 60,000 girls, and distributed over $500,000 to community-driven partners. This work could not be accomplished without the huge investment of time, thought leadership, and resources of the incredible Amplify Girls partners. In 2019, our partners identified girls' agency as an outcome that they believed was an imperative for success for adolescent girls across a wide range of sectors. Over the past 3 years, Amplify Girls partners and our team have co-created a tool that measures girls' agency. It has been statistically validated for our partner organizations across 4 different countries. And we are about to embark on an exciting initiative that will enable this tool to be available to everyone in Eastern Africa. We will dive more into this during part 2 of our Agency Symposium this Thursday. But first off, today, we are thrilled to welcome an incredible panel of global advocates who are also invested in girls' agency. We know everyone is here because they're interested in diving into the intricacies of girls' agency. It is a complex outcome and one that requires nuance and broad discussion. Today, we are going to share more about what has been accomplished in the field and why more resources should be invested in developing girls' agency. I am very happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. Aubryn Seidel, the director of the Girls Agency Lab at Amplify Girls and lecturer at Cornell University in the Department of Global Development. Aubryn has been spearheading the co-creation of the agency tool over the past 3 years with Brenda Oulo, our deputy director of the Girls Agency Lab, with our incredible partners. She will be our moderator for today's panel discussion. Welcome, Aubryn.
Thank you, Margaret. It's just a joy to be here with you all today. Thanks to our audience. Welcome to all of you from around the world. We are excited to engage in this conversation about the power and practice of adolescent girls' agency. As you know, we've assembled an expert group of practitioners and researchers to speak with us today about the importance of agency for adolescent girls and to help us learn about what works in the practice of helping young women in building their agentic capacity. So it's my privilege to introduce this group. I'm going to go through a round of introductions and then we'll launch into the conversation. First, I'd like to introduce one of Amplify Girls' own leaders, Linda Kamau. Linda is the co-founder and co-executive director of Akira Chicks, an organization based in Nairobi, Kenya, that trains talented young women in Africa to compete economically and to bridge the gender gap in tech. She was a software engineer for 10 years, working with an international team where she was often the only woman of color in a leadership position, which motivated her current work. Linda holds a BS in Information Technology from Lim Kok Kwing University in Malaysia and a certificate in Social Entrepreneurship from Stanford University. She is a board member of the Wiser Girls School in Kenya and is part of the inaugural Obama Leaders Africa class. In the next 10 years, Akira Chicks plans to train 10,000 women to take over the tech industry worldwide. Welcome, Linda. Next, we have Dr. Laura Hinson, who is a senior social and behavioral scientist at the International Center for Research on Women, where she designs and leads research projects related to child marriage, adolescent sexual and reproductive health, reproductive empowerment, and positive youth development. Dr. Hinson currently serves as principal investigator on an impact evaluation of a child marriage intervention in Malawi, and recently was principal investigator of a cluster randomized controlled trial of an adolescent program in Burkina Faso. She brings extensive experience in both qualitative and quantitative research methodologies and more than a decade of public health experience to her current role. Nicole Haberland is joining us today from the Population Council, where she's a senior associate and leads the council's work in education and the Evidence for Gender and Education Resource Project, or EAGER, which serves as a clearinghouse for promising practices in girls' education from around the world. She leads work on empowerment-based sexuality education. Nicole co-edited the It's All One curriculum, which is a user-friendly resource that provides a rationale, content, and sample activities for placing gender and rights at the center of life skills, sexuality, and HIV education curricula. She is an expert in gender and education evidence and girl-centered program design and a passionate advocate for programs that address girls' agency, gender, and power, and girls' attitudes towards gender norms. And then last but not least, I'm hoping we have with us Dr. Maliha Khan, the president and CEO of Women Deliver. Dr. Khan has 25 years of experience in girls and women's empowerment and was most recently at the Malala Fund, where Dr. Khan led the strategic direction of the fund's work to ensure that all girls have access to 12 years of free, safe, and quality education. She is an expert in program design, performance, and learning, and has worked extensively on creating and implementing frameworks for difficult to measure concepts such as gender empowerment, attitude change, and resilience. She has taught as professor of gender studies and implemented programs in the marginalized regions of her native Pakistan. We welcome all of our panelists. We're thrilled to have such an expert group here with us today. So I think we're going to dive right into the conversation. And, you know, setting the stage a little bit, I'd like to start by defining agency. It's something we talk about a lot. It's rather nebulous and sometimes a bit hard to nail down. I think for our purposes today, I think we can agree that we'll define agency as the ability a girl has to affect change in her own life and community. I would love to hear from our panelists who have, as we've mentioned, extensive experience about programming related to girls' agency, about what you've learned through your programming and why agency is uniquely important for young women. Linda, I'm going to start with you. You're doing amazing work with young women in East Africa, training them to enter a sector where they'll be the gender minority in their roles. How does Akira Chicks tackle girls' agency? Why do you think it's important? And maybe you can also tell us a bit about how your program has developed over time.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Aubrey. Happy to be here. As Aubrey mentioned, we work in the tech space, and Akira Chicks exists to pretty much be the leading source of African female tech talent for the world. The tech industry is one of the most fast-growing industries or sectors in the world, and not necessarily, well, when we narrow it down to the African continent, it's one of the fastest growing sectors, contributing in terms of GDP, it's contributing a lot. And this means that there's a lot of opportunities that have surfaced in terms of employment for young people. And so for us, we see ourselves as our role is to pretty much provide talent, but mainly female tech talent, and especially because the tech industry is pretty much where we have a huge gender disparity when it comes to, hiring of talent. So there's more men than there are women in the tech industry or worldwide. And so for doing this work for the last 12 years, we've spent a lot of time understanding or trying to understand why we don't have more women in the tech space. And from research we did in 2014 to our programming work that we do with our Code Hive program, we came to a realization that the problem of women in tech is not necessarily a skills problem. It's actually a human problem. And when I mean human, it's pretty much lacking of the agency to actually be able to know this is a field that I can actually get into. And so when we look back at the kind of work that we do, we work with young women from underserved backgrounds and give them the right skills. And so we combine, because of how the program is structured, it's very holistic. So we combine both the tech skills, but then the agency side. So we believe in building the human. And when we say we are building the human, we are looking at working with this young woman to really help her understand that this field that is the tech industry is not meant for a selected few, but while at it be able to develop confidence, self-esteem, get the right skills, be able to speak up for themselves, and especially because it's a field that by default they don't have the it's not so welcoming. And so if we can get them to speak up in terms of, for instance, even going for an event and being able to speak up rather than just sitting at the back, to even being able to apply for opportunities, because again, as I say, there's a lot of opportunities that are coming up in terms of job placements, but then most women will always think about, I'm not qualified for that, even now, and especially with our students. And so when you have, you spend a lot of time trying to ensure that they're growing themselves in terms of, building the confidence to even apply for jobs, be able to speak up for themselves, be able to negotiate, be able to plan their lives, figure out what does my career path look like in the next few years? So we have intentionally made agency a core of our program, because whether you provide them with coding skills, I always say you can give anyone a laptop and internet and they learn how to code online. But then as long as they lack the agency, they won't be able to intentionally seek for opportunities. And so we invest heavily in building the human that then makes it easy for them to get the skills and be able to use the technical skills to be able to thrive and take themselves out of the cycle of poverty.
Thanks so much, Linda. I really appreciate what you said about a human problem, right? That building the whole girl is critically important to ensure that girls can translate the skills that they can learn in a variety of settings into actually action in their lives. So Laura and Nicole, I know both the ICRW and the Population Council have done a lot of work on girls' empowerment, especially in the context of sexual and reproductive health and rights. Maybe Laura, starting with you, can you share some of your learning at ICRW, the programs that you're currently engaged in related to this, and what you've learned about why agency is important?
Yeah, sure. First, thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm really excited to be here. At ICRW, we work with Girls Agency in 4 key ways. First, we implement flagship programming with adolescent girls focused on building and sustaining their agency. We also do programming with boys and communities as well, again, addressing gender norms so these groups can better support girls' agency. So for example, in India, we have a program called Planet Girls. This program seeks to build self-efficacy and employment skills among adolescent girls by shifting prevailing gender norms. We also conduct research and evaluation around what works for agency and adolescent programming. For example, we recently finished an evaluation of the Engage program in Southern Malawi that worked to train girls to be agents of change in their own communities. And this evaluation tested whether just focusing on building girls' agency could produce change in their communities related to child marriage, sexual reproductive health, or whether girls really need to be additionally supported by an enabling environment around them for these changes to happen. So kind of answering learning questions around that. Thirdly, ICRW works to build agency through participatory methodologies, meaningfully involving young girls in implementation and monitoring, evaluation, and learning efforts. So for India's Planet Girls program, as well as their PUNK program, we used peer mentors who were young women from the community to lead social mapping of program needs, including class and caste dynamics, location of locating resources and platforms in the community, et cetera. And finally, we at ICRW, we help define and conceptualize terms like agency, empowerment, positive youth development, very complex and sticky terms. We try to break those down for the field. We collate quality indicators as well as develop our own scales and tools, again, helping to measure these concepts. And we think critically about the challenges of measuring these concepts and how we can overcome that. So we have publications on reproductive empowerment, reproductive health decision-making agency, what agency means for and to young people. And so finally, a little bit about what we have learned about why agency is important. So through our research, we found that agency-based programming, especially and importantly, programming that works across the ecological model in that larger enabling environment, is really critical for measuring success and outcomes that we care about. So in India, we've seen significant increases in self-esteem and gender equitable attitudes for boys and girls, as well as for increased economic efficacy, preparation for future employment, career decision-making efficacy. In Malawi, we found significant improvement in adult caregivers' beliefs that girls have a right to make decisions about whom and when to marry. We all know adolescents are in this unique phase of life. There's all sorts of transitions going on all at once, all around them. We've learned that having voice, choice, and power is critical for navigating some of these sensitive domains, such as education, livelihood, and experiences of desire, safe and consensual relationships. Building girls' agency is a lifelong investment that sustains girls' capacities as they grow to become adults who can and want to meaningfully contribute to society. So, thank you.
Thanks, Laura. I think we can all appreciate that building girls' agency is a lifelong investment, especially those of us who've been in this field for a long time. So thank you for sharing about the work at ICRW in this regard. I'm going to pass now to Nicole to share a bit about Pop Council's work in girls' agency and your learning in the space.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to Amplify Girls for hosting this symposium. It's a real pleasure to be here with all the other panelists. Fostering girls' agency and empowerment has long been a central aim of Pop Council programs and research. It's core to our work with girls. We generate and synthesize evidence, test innovations, and foster evidence utilization. Because agency, so the ability to act on one's own behalf, pursue one's goals, exercise influence and voice is important as a life skill in its own right. It's also an essential asset that may contribute to improved health outcomes, less violence, and greater opportunities in girls' lives. And I'm going to skip around a little bit some of the evidence. So while there is increasing evidence on the impact of agency, most of these studies aren't causal. They often don't account for endogeneity. For example, unobserved variables that are related, that affect both agency and the outcome of interest. Or if we're looking at cross-sectional data, we often don't determine the direction of the effect. Is it agency that leads to more years of schooling, or more years of schooling that leads to agency? But we know they're associated, but how? So nonetheless, while not causal, an analysis of longitudinal data from a council study in Zambia gets closer to causality, at least temporally. It found that compared to lower agency girls who had high agency were the least likely to be married, experience unwanted pregnancy, or begin childbearing in adolescence. Now, this analysis also found really interesting, I think, that the girls at highest risk of these events, so early marriage, pregnancy, and childbearing, were in the group that the authors called self-assured gender conformers. These girls were characterized by high self-efficacy, but held inequitable gender attitudes. And they were the ones that had the highest risk. So while there's compelling evidence that agency may lead to better sexual and reproductive health outcomes, as it's often defined, and we can maybe talk more about how agency is operationalized, it's not sufficient. Self-efficacy in a value-free vacuum won't itself lead to beneficial outcomes. Rather than self-efficacy may get directed in such situations to achieving the predominant and often unequal gender norms. And results from a qualitative study in Somalia similarly suggest that without equitable gender norms, agency can make things worse. They found that adolescence agency was used within the existing system of social norms that rewarded early marriage. And so those girls were getting married earlier. Another qualitative study drawing on data from 3 Latin American countries also found the need to address social norms to foster transformative agency versus what they called accommodating or oppositional agency. And this is one of the things I really like about the Amplify Girls tool and conception of agency, is that it incorporates gender attitudes. Even so, sometimes there's no effect, and there's reasons for that. For example, I'm working on a paper with a colleague in India, P.G. Santia, that finds that agency, and we're using a metric that includes gender attitudes, is not having an impact on child marriage once other possible explanatory variables are controlled for. Education, however, does, I'll note. However, in this context, girls' agency was very low overall. Early marriage was highly prevalent, so it may be that in settings like this, girls' agency doesn't stand much of a chance against prevailing practices and power structures. And it gets to the ecological model that Aubryn and Laura were talking about. Nonetheless, I firmly believe agency is central to empowering girls, but how does it fit into the picture? We're doing a systematic review looking at the causal pathways that lead from education to improved health outcomes. And is agency one of those pathways through which education, whether literacy or attainment, decreases HIV risk or reduces child mortality? There's a lot to understand and explore. It's really exciting, I think. But in the meantime, I think just the face value of increasing girls' voice, choice, and control is indisputable, and I think something everybody can get behind. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nicole. I think that's fascinating, especially your questions around the relationship between gender norms and agency. We'll be sharing a bit more about Amplify Girls tool on Thursday, which is a tool that includes within the definition of agency girls' attitudes towards gender. And more broadly, her beliefs about whether or not her environment can be changed, right? Because we know there are the environment around a girl, the very real structural constraints really have an impact on agency and her ability to exercise agency. So I think these are fascinating questions. Also, what you raise about the causal relationship between agency and other outcomes, something that's very understudied. I am excited to learn more about Pop Council's work in that regard. Amplify is launching this year a study to investigate the causal relationship between agency and education outcomes. We hope we'll have some publicly available materials about that in the year ahead. But I think all of you raised these really interesting questions about the challenges associated with the practice of girls' agency. So these are sometimes related to conceptualization, as you discussed, Nicole, like how do we even define agency? How do we measure it? And in terms of program design, how do we ensure that we are teaching agency, helping girls develop agency? It's not something that's as straightforward as, teaching basic literacy and numeracy skills, for example. So going back to Linda, maybe to start, can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced or you see in practicing girls' agency and actually incorporating this into program design?
Yeah, I think when we started out, I think with the first agency framework in terms of like just monitoring and checking the girls' agency from a longitudinal perspective. I remember the first results we got for our first cohort weren't really, there were not so much difference in terms of the baseline and the end line. And for me, that was worrying, because it's like, so how do we know we're doing anything? Like, is there anything? Are we even making any changes? And I remember spending time, I think, with the team and the Amplify team and our team trying to figure out how best we could do to ensure that we can see improvements from the time the young women join the program to the time they graduate, and we can at least see something that has changed. So definitely one of the things that for me I was struggling with was in terms of monitoring and asking ourselves, are the interventions that we are trying to do to help the young women improve their agency actually being useful, or are they actually achieving anything? Luckily, in the last 2 cohorts that we've done the like the agency study on, we've seen significant change. But then I think it's still something that you keep asking yourself every day, like, are the interventions that we are putting in actually doing anything? Is there anything actually happening? And especially because you have like a whole 10 months between the baseline and the end line, and so there's a lot that happens in the middle. That then I think for me sometimes I ask, is it based on our program, or is it just based on the environment? As we said, or we have a residential program, so the students come from their homes and live on campus. So so sometimes it's hard to actually say this is the reason as to why they have a higher agency is based on the fact that they went through the pro-life program. It would just be because they have a new beautiful space that that's it. There's not much that we did. And so I think sometimes that's like just some of the things that we struggle with, and especially because our goal is to ensure that by the time the young women graduate, they're it's a holistic person. They have the tech skills, they're good at speaking for themselves, they have all the agency that they should have at that point. And while at it, they can keep growing even as they get into the industry, because that's another side of things that you can quickly, even if you are your agency, you can quickly lose or agency because of just that, the fact that you are in an industry and you don't have the right support. So there's a lot of work that I feel like you end up doing, but then you're not so sure whether it's actually contributing to that. So I think those are some of the challenges that you go through, and some even just based on how, like, what affects what. Like, for instance, in this case, does parenting affect agency? Like, by the time a student is joining a care chicks, they've gone through 18 years of being parented. And so now you're having to deal with it's like you have to unlearn or relearn a few of those things. So does that affect how their agency develops? So those are some of the things that we keep asking ourselves. And there's still challenges, and especially with dealing with different generations of people in terms of where they are at. When I look, currently we're dealing with, I think Gen Z is what everyone is dealing with, which is a very different generation than the 2 years or 3 years ago that kind of students that we were dealing with. So yeah, I think just being able to know that your intervention is doing what it's supposed to do is like a big challenge for most of us.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I mean, the challenge of monitoring and evaluation, especially a construct like this, is so difficult. And I know you've been implementing Amplify Girls agency survey over the course of the last 3 years. And we have all kinds of challenges that you raised related to measurement, right? Some of them being that, agency is something that likely develops naturally over the course of the life. Girls do not enter into programming with similar amounts of agency. Of course, their early childhood, their home life, all of these things influence where they start in that regard. And it's difficult for us to unpack and know which of these things are having the biggest influence. And, something that we've heard from other Amplify partners too, is that when girls get admitted into a program like Akira Chicks, they get this boost of self-confidence that often reflects in a written agency score. And so knowing what the true baseline is, I think you just raised a lot of really important challenges and questions for practice. I think on that note, I'm going to pass it now to Nicole to maybe talk about the challenges that you see. Also in terms of measuring agency over time, we know that this is something that we're all kind of learning to do together.
Thank you. And thanks, Linda, for those thoughts. It's really, that's where it's hard is figuring it all out in the program on the ground in real time. Anyway, conceptualization is definitely a challenge. What does agency mean for girls? If agency is about acting on one's behalf and voice and strategic life choices, the problem is there are far fewer opportunities when one is young to demonstrate these. So what do we measure? Compared to adult women, girls have fewer consequential decisions, or often the consequential decisions just aren't in their control. And existing gender systems often simply don't allow for girls' voice, or very little of it. For example, in settings where they will be married, where they have no say in whether they will be married or not, or to whom. So I just want to, quick aside related to this conceptual element. My colleague Fatima Zara is leading work at the Pop Council with the World Bank Gender Innovation Lab and the Center for Global Development on a framework for adolescent girls' economic empowerment. And as with agency in the arena of economic empowerment, the frameworks and measures for adolescents are just copy pasted from those for women without thinking about how they should be different. And anyway, so in terms of measurement, agency can be a challenge because it's a long game. In the council for we did a randomized control trial of the AGEP program in Zambia. And it wasn't until 2 years, the follow-up 2 years after the end of the program, that we detected an improvement in self-efficacy. So it took that long to manifest. Further, some of the impact that one would hope that increased agency leads to, such as more equitable decision-making in relationships, or better sexual and reproductive health outcomes, better schooling for children, less violence, better income, those aren't detectable until the girl is actually in a relationship, has a job, has children of her own. So this is often long after the program is over and the evaluation endline report has long been published. So girls agency is an intergenerational project. Capturing its impact under typical timelines and research budgets is at best incomplete, and at worst next to impossible sometimes. We really need those longer term longitudinal follow-up surveys. It would just contribute immensely to our understanding of the transformative power of agency and how it affects these longer term outcomes. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. I think this question of agency as a long game, a long-term investment, similar to education, right? And because of that, it's so difficult to, one, measure, but two, also to really rally investment for, because it's something that happens over a long period of time. Laura, would love to hear from you about the challenges that you've encountered at ICRW related to measurement and conceptualization. Please share a bit about your own work.
Sure. Yeah, as I was saying, we've thought a lot about measuring agency, especially for adolescent girls. There's a lot of challenges. I think I'll pick right up from where Nicole was leaving off, especially on some of my thoughts. The first one being, getting the right framework for adolescent girls agency, and this is something Nicole was making. I mean, there's certain decisions highlighted in these larger frameworks that exist right now around women's empowerment that just aren't applicable for girls. They're not there in their life stage yet. Some of these constructs just aren't working to sort of retrofit them to girls specifically. So I think we really need to kind of move towards frameworks for girls. And it's exciting to hear about some of the work she's doing around economic empowerment for girls. Even that said, just having a standalone framework for girls still will have some challenges. I mean, even though it seems like girls and adolescents is a very narrow band, we still have to appreciate so many nuances within that. There's different age groups within adolescence that are different. There's different life stages even within adolescence, evolving capabilities such as girls with disabilities. From the evidence, we know that some of these constructs or elements of agency don't universally resonate across ages within adolescence. There's also evidence that shows that vulnerable girls or girls in severely restricted environments are less likely to be influenced by empowerment or agency program or find key constructs relevant to them. So some of the challenges with that. Secondly, we have to step away from only considering individual aspects of agency and bring in that enabling environment that surrounds girls. And I think both Linda and Nicole have talked about this to some extent too. We need to develop individual girls' empowerment and agency, but also we need to think about the larger environment around them, the family, the community structures that play a critical role in their lives. And evidence suggests that multi-component agency programming is more successful than singular programming, even for very young adolescents. And there's also ample evidence of the importance of adults and role models in girls' lives. And finally, just thinking about how to approach conceptualizing and measuring agency for girls. I think a lot of this has come and taken a bit more of a Eurocentric approach, and this is useful, but insufficient. We know we have to think about taking a true empowerment-based approach, which means starting with the ground up, starting with anthropological and qualitative data to really build frameworks that validly represent girls' agency and local translation of specific agency notions. We have to define agency alongside girls, not for girls. And to this point, I've really enjoyed the work the Amplify Girls has been doing in this space because I think they are making tremendous efforts to develop a measure of agency that does this, that really incorporates and starts with a community perspective. So just a few thoughts.
Thanks, Laura. So many questions related to practice, early adolescence versus older adolescents, enabling environments, structural constraints. I think that segues us nicely into talking about some of the things that you all have seen are effective, promising approaches for improving girls' agentic capacity. And I'm actually going to pass it back to you, Linda, to start as the practitioner here among us. I think we'd really value to hear what you have seen working, even if it's sometimes difficult to know from our measurement tools as a practitioner and someone who sees the work every day. I'm sure you have some sense of what seems to be working in your programs around girls' agency.
Yeah, I think one of the main things, I think it's also based on like just leveraging, for instance, when we get the baseline done, being able to understand like what exactly are the issues that maybe we could develop a curriculum around to actually solve or help these young women get some support when it comes to building their agency. And so, I mean, previously before, as I said, the first cohort, when we did the agency survey, there was no significant change. And so just using that data to be able to ask ourselves, what can we do to improve this? And so reworking our curriculum to, especially on the life skills side, we don't call it life skills. We don't love that name. We call it navigating your journey because we believe that's what agency is. It's navigating your journey. Whatever journey you're on, you pretty much navigate it. And so getting the right support to be able to navigate. And in this case, you're navigating your journey as a woman in tech. And so asking ourselves, what can we introduce to ensure that we give you the right support? And so we reworked our Navigating Your Journey class to ensure that we're incorporating some of the things that we feel like if we help you start, you actually get to be in that class, then you start figuring out different things. And even from the feedback that we get and the reports, the agency report we get from each class, it helps us keep asking ourselves, what can we do better to improve the specific class itself? What can we introduce to help people start thinking in a different direction? For instance, the one thing that the Navigating Your Journey does when you join the program, and after some time, I think about a month or so, we have you start putting together your vision board. And just immediately with that, everyone has to have a vision board. And I'm sure they half the time they never understand why we're doing a vision board. But over time, they start figuring out, oh, I'm pretty much figuring out what my life looks like. Like, what do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? And be more ambitious. And how do I build myself to actually achieve what I've put down on this vision board? And so there's a lot of reworking that we do to ensure that at the end of it all, someone is able to realize that I can actually plan my life and be able to actually work to achieve it. But then also what we've seen help, and especially in our context, is having role models. And in this case, it's not people that we just hear about, like you're like Barack Obama is your role model, but you've never met them. No, it's pretty much people who you can relate, that you can even meet them now or tomorrow. And this mostly is usually the alumni of the program. And so most of the times we have a very close alumni community, such that they can look and see, wow, that person was in this program last year, was clearly fresh like I am right now. I've never touched a computer. I don't even know what this career I'm getting myself into. I don't even think of whether I'm going to drive. But then they're thriving. They're currently employed in one of the best tech startups in Africa. They're earning good money. You can see how they present themselves, how some of them are even trainer assistants for their classes. So those are the people that, you can start seeing a shift in them because they can see themselves in that person by the end of the year. So I feel like reintroducing role models has really helped, especially for our last two cohorts that have actually, been part of the study. And I think we've seen a lot of change in the young women within the program, and you can tell it's because they do see themselves in the alumni. So I feel like a combination of different things that we've done has helped us see a little bit of change, and I feel like there's more we can do, and definitely looking to learn from everyone else in the panel, and yeah, borrow a few things here and there.
Thanks, Linda. I love this image of the vision board and girls planning their journey together. And, I really appreciate too the power of role models. I think that's something that a lot of programs and practitioners have voiced is really important. Moving next, maybe to Laura, can you share a bit about what you've seen as promising practice for Girls Agency?
Sure. Yeah, and as always, like my prior thinking to what I was going to talk about shifts as I listen to my panelists here and just kind of want to continue building on some of the things Linda was saying. But there's a lot to consider, and I've sort of already talked about the importance of changing gender and social norms, and we have some evidence on that and thinking on that. But sometimes I get overwhelmed with thinking about how we're going to make these massive changes. So I just wanted to actually highlight something else that's a bit more tangible. And again, building on what Linda was saying, and that is skill building. It's one of the key pieces of this work. And you can call it soft skills, life skills. I loved that she called it navigation skills. I think that's so brilliant. I actually haven't heard that before. But these are the skills, the behaviors, the qualities that enable young people to effectively navigate their environment, relate to others, perform well, and achieve their goals. And these skills are teachable. It's something that it's tangible. We can build these skills. And in our work in the positive youth development space, of which Girls Agency is critical, we have learned that those skills actually lead to long-term education, employment, health, and violence prevention outcomes. By building these skills, and that by building these skills, you can actually address multiple outcomes at the same time. So you get more bang for your buck. For example, there's evidence suggesting that building a positive self-concept, self-control, and higher order thinking skills have each individually been linked with workforce success, sexual and reproductive health, well-being, and violence prevention. So again, some very tangible things that we've learned, especially through our work in the positive youth development space.
Great, thanks, Laura. I think we've already had some questions from the audience, about the relationship between agency and violence against women, also male attitudes on gender. So I think you raised some really important points and really concrete feedback for folks who are thinking about implementing agency-related programs. Moving now to you, Nicole, I know that you've done a lot of work on the question of gender and power at the Population Council. Would love to hear some thoughts from you coming out of that bucket of work about promising approaches to girls' agency.
Thanks. And thanks, Laura and Linda, for, I completely agree with both of you. And Linda, I don't know if you may have seen this, but there's a systematic review that, I forget the author now, did on effective vocational training. And what they found was when programs do what you're doing, which is combine it with life skills, it's more likely to have an impact on the economic outcomes. Anyway, if you haven't seen, I can share that. But anyway, thanks for this question. I'm going to also go with empowerment-based life skills programs. These are programs that use learner-centered pedagogies and foster critical thinking about gender and power, which I think is kind of what everybody likes to do here. My colleagues, Christina Mizunas and Sajida Amin, just published a fantastic paper that illuminates this really well. They use data from the Balika evaluation. Now, Balika tested 3 program variations to empower adolescent girls in a randomized controlled trial in Bangladesh. And all 3 variations had a similar basis. So they all had mentored safe spaces where girls met weekly. All 3 of the program arms followed the same basic life skills curriculum. And all 3 program arms had a community engagement component. But each arm then had a special focus. So arm 1 focused on education and had tutoring support in math and English. The second arm focused on livelihoods training, for example, in computers, basic paramedic skills, photography, and other market needs. And the third arm fostered gender and rights awareness. So in addition to the basic life skills curriculum that all the study arms had, they used its all-on curriculum to teach about gender equality and build girls' agency and critical thinking skills. And all 3 program variations had large effects on the primary outcome. So all significantly reduced child marriage by 25 to 30% compared to control villages, which is big. Furthermore, and what I think is really interesting for this audience, is that the third arm, the one that both had in content and facilitation approach, explicitly engaged girls in critically examining gender norms and fostering agency, that arm also increased girls' school retention and significantly increased girls' labor force participation. Whereas none of the other program variations did that unless they were specifically targeting education or livelihood. So the education arm also had an impact on education, but that's not so surprising. Furthermore, in a new paper where they used latent class analysis, they found that at end line, girls in the gender and rights awareness arm had the highest probability of being in the most empowered class of 4 classes. So the classes were least empowered, mobile and sexually active, socially progressive, and mobile, socially active, and socially progressive. So all that to say, empowerment-based life skills programs can have a multi-sectoral transformative impact. And good work, everybody. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Nicole. So I think that leads me to my last question for you all, and then we'll move to some audience Q&A. But if we are, as practitioners and researchers and advocates in the adolescent girls space, going to build momentum for a girls' agency agenda. What are some of your thoughts on the necessary next steps for that? And Laura, we're actually going to start with you.
I feel like whenever I'm asked this question, I give like the world's cheesiest answer, which is just that we need to collaborate more. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but it's really hard to do because none of our budgets ever have money to collaborate. We get assigned our roles to build this measure or do this study, and there's never time to really connect. I mean, this is one way to collaborate, and this has been awesome, and it's lovely to see so many participants, and I'm seeing all the pop-ups on the chat. But we also need dedicated funding to just get in the room and kind of share what we have, and then find out what the gaps are, come up collaboratively with our priorities for where we need to focus efforts, and figure out how we can continue to build. So this is always my pitch to any donors or funders in the room, you know, to put some resources towards that and help us move the field forward. So that's my pitch.
Great pitch, one I think that resonates with all of us. Nicole, I'll pass to you next.
Okay, I completely agree. And sort of in the carpenter, so everything I see is a nail vein. I'm going to take a research perspective to that. First, we really do need better metrics, and I'm really excited about the work that Amplify Girls is doing. And also the field needs a way to share these learnings and grow together. And so I'd love to brainstorm, maybe share the Eager platform as the web portal as a way to share the learning, or think about other ways to keep this conversation going. But I agree. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. The Eager platform is a great resource for those who haven't entered it. I'm hoping we can put a link to it in the chat. All right, Linda, you have the last word, building momentum for a girls' agency agenda. What do you see?
I think speaking from a dual practitioner perspective, I think it's we need to be more intentional in terms of girls' agency. I think for most of our organizations, based on the work that we do, budget limitations, as Laura has said, there's a lot of, I just want to do the skills building part and that's it, finish, because that's what the grant is all about, like, you know, vocational training and that's it. But then I think the reason as to why, and I think Nicole mentioned this earlier, is when we're not intentional, then even the outcomes that we are looking in terms of, like, for instance, economic, because I think most of us are on the economic side, then you don't realize them. Like, the impact is not as high because we didn't invest in the human. So for us, I believe that we've seen what works, like when you invest in the human, then the impact is greater. The economic impact especially is greater. I mean, we currently boast a very high placement rate of 85% job placement rate, and of which 70% of it is within 60 days of graduation. That's not easy. That's not easy for any coding. I mean, even other coding bootcamps, that's not something that they achieve. But then we know where this is coming from. It's not about the coding skills that they have. No, it's pretty much based on the agency that they've built. The feedback we get from our industry is pretty much the young women have a growth mindset. They come in, even if they don't know, they have an amazing growth mindset, and they are able to quickly ramp up and get things going. And I'm like, that's not about the coding. It's not about anything that we taught them in the coding. It's pretty much the human. And so for me, I feel like if we as practitioners can start being intentional. Yes, it does take resources and a lot of time, but then it's one of the things that will separate you even from any other person who's doing the work that we're doing. And all of us are always trying to look for resources. And I'm sure a funder seeing how your work is doing is your impact, the impact on your work means that you can get more resources. And so you can end up actually just focusing on that. And that's where I feel like we are at as a Career Chicks. We've been able to get people who now support us based on the fact that we are building a holistic person, and not necessarily we are teaching coders, we're building coders. No, it's about the human, and not necessarily just churning talent that never gets anywhere. So I'd say intentionality from the doer side.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Linda. And I think, this question of holistic programming, being intentional about agency, is a really important one. I'm going to piggyback on what you all have said related to that in terms of building momentum for a girls' agency agenda. Someone's put in the chat, if we could speak a little bit about the funding gaps that might exist now when it comes to girls' agency programming. And, one thing I'll share is that I think funders are really keen to have quantitative evidence that really documents impact numerically. And while that's really important and not to be disregarded, it is obviously really difficult, as we've discussed today, to measure agency. And we are working hard on developing measures that are good and that are culturally relevant, but that work takes time. And in the meantime, we should be able to say that programs that have these sort of holistic approaches are a worthwhile investment for improving girls' agency, that there are some things we know about practice. So empowering life skills education, for example, that are likely to improve girls' agency. And we should be willing to invest in those, that it's not actually a risky business while we're developing the measures that work around it. So sort of related to that, we're going to move to some Q&A. We have a ton of questions, so we're going to work through as many as we can. I thought it might be nice for us first to tackle the question of the definition of girls' agency. Somebody has asked, just kind of taking a few steps back, is the definition of agency always the same in different contexts? And I think, at Amplify Girls, we've done a lot of work around that exact question. And I think our short answer would be yes and no. But I would love to hear from some of the panelists on that front. I don't know if anyone wants to start, or I'll just sort of call on one of you, but maybe perhaps Laura, you all have done a lot of work on measurement and conceptualization. Can you speak a little bit to the question of defining agency in different cultural contexts?
Yeah, this is really, really tricky. And I think this is always the tension in the field as we're thinking about measuring something, right? Like we want to have some sort of standardized measure that can work in all contexts so we can really understand agency at the global level. But we know that there's different expressions of agency locally and that the local context matters. So it's just tough. I think we still have a lot of work to do to continue to validate some of the existing measures we have, to see how they work or don't work. And again, I think this is why, thinking about qualitative ways of understanding and measuring agency is so important to really be able to capture some of the local things. But I think no matter what, it's just always going to be messy. Like agency is messy, measuring agency is messy. I think the best thing we can do is just keep trying and kicking the can a little bit further down the road and building towards something, but just really appreciating that this is complex. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but that was just some thoughts I had.
I think that was as good as any of us are going to get to a real answer. Linda, do you have thoughts on this question?
I think, I don't know, I think it's the same thing you said, it's yes or no, like it's different, but maybe sometimes it's not different. Because also sometimes it's like, for instance, I can see like for our sector, there's the way we view agency that is very different with the way you view agency sometimes for adolescent girls. I mean, the young women you work with are between 18 and 24, which is another different age group. Whose agency is also very different, but then there's also some similarities at any one given point. So I think, yeah, it's a yes or no, but then there are some key things that pop at any one given point when it comes to defining agency. So, so I think there are these ones that there are similarities, but also there are parts that are more unique towards a certain age group or sector or kind of work that we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Linda. Nicole.
Yes, it's contextual. Yes, it's hard. I totally agree. The things I really wish, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there's like some core piece that we'll figure out that is, relevant across contexts in some way, because I think we're, a good, synthesizing across settings is so valuable. And anyway, I don't know. I don't think we're there yet. I think we can, as you know, Laura said, we can get a lot closer and keep pushing. But yeah, it is highly contextual. You know, what is a strategic life choice in one setting doesn't matter at all, you know, and everybody does in another. So you just, to make it real and relatable and relevant to the girl, it often means, you know, it'll be very different in different settings. But I think the intent and sort of the spirit of it, though, maybe somehow we can capture. You know.
Yeah, I think this is a really challenging question, as you all have posed. And I think, you know, one thing it sounds like we all agree on is that, yes, agency differs from context to context, right? How a girl develops agency, the expression of her agency is really going to depend on the specific constraints that she faces in her life, the sociocultural norms that she grows up with, her family environment. All of these things matter for girls' agency. I think one of the things we've been hoping at Amplify Girls is that if we can develop a robust framework, conceptual framework for defining agency at the very high level, one that is locally grounded in practitioners' expertise and the folks that are working closest with girls and even girls themselves, that maybe we can identify a framework for measuring agency that can be applied across a broad variety of contexts. I wouldn't dare to say universally everywhere, but that the individual measures might look different. So for example, what skills matter for a girl's agency are likely going to depend on where she grows up. Is she growing up in Nairobi, Kenya, for example, or in rural Zambia? The skills that matter for her life and her ability to navigate her journey, Linda, as you've pointed out, are likely to change depending on that context. So I think to further dodge that question, I think it's clear that the definition of agency the way agency manifests does change place to place. And we're working to develop tools, right, all of us, to measure agency as best we can given this variation, but ensuring that our measures are grounded locally with local expertise and the folks that are doing the work on the ground, I think is a good directive for all of us. So last question, I think in the interest of time, there are so many questions and I wish we could get to them all, but you know, there's been a lot of folks asking about the relationship broadly between girls' agency and other aspects of her life. So that we've seen some questions about the relationship between girls' agency, early marriage, girls' agency and FGM or FGC, girls' agency and her sort of economic empowerment journey. I was wondering if maybe as a last question, you all could talk a little bit about the direct relationship you see between girls' agency and some other aspect of her life. Where have you seen agency produce the most powerful outcomes? And I think that synthesizes nicely a bunch of questions that folks have asked. Linda, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think I can speak from an economic perspective, because then that's our goal at Akirishix. We want economic empowerment for the young women that we work with. And we see agency, I think we've had this discussion before, I think with Pauline and Brenda, because for me, the one thing that I would love to see is just figure out whether there's a direct relation between someone's agency and then being able to get a well-paying job and how fast they get it. Yeah, even in terms of the speed of how fast you get it because of the level of agency. So it's something that we're going to probably be tackling from next year based on our last data set for the last 3 years, being able to start comparing and seeing whether that is a direct relationship. But then based on the assumptions or the little the impact or the feedback that we have from our graduates, it's sometimes always easy you can always tell someone with a higher agency is going to be among the first person to actually secure a good job and keep growing in the industry. And while at it, when you start seeing in terms of even what that job means to them, and in terms of like actualizing their initial vision board, and so you're able to start seeing a lot of things changing, and even in terms of like the power they hold, even in their communities. You start seeing they are now decision makers, if I can call it that way, in their homes, because they're the ones, I mean, I think money is power. So at any one given point, everybody in the home needs to ask the question. They are asked everything to make decisions based on, and yet previously that was not the case. They were not, their voice didn't matter, if I can say it that way. But then because now they're economically stable in terms of money, and they're able to do things, then now the households, the rules change. And so they are able to start making decisions that start impacting and ensuring that they're breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty, because they're able to support their parents, maybe small businesses, they're able to support their siblings with school fees and things like that. So I feel like there's a I feel like there is, but then I think I don't have the proof in terms of like the data, but hoping we can get that done in the next, based on our last 3 years data, to be able to actually show that. But I do believe that there is a direct relationship between agency and economic independence or empowerment for young women. So, yeah.
Yeah, great, Linda, and a nice plug for more research. Great, maybe Nicole, let's turn to you on this question.
Yeah, economic outcomes definitely up there. I guess, I mean, my answer is I don't know, because we haven't synthesized the evidence yet. But where there is, more evidence, but I think this is partly because there's been more of an investment in researching it, is some of some of the health outcomes, like condom use or pregnancy or childbearing. Not that we have a slam dunk answer there, but there does seem to be a little, there is a little bit more accumulated evidence. So yeah, and I think even then though, it varies from setting to setting why and how it might matter. If there are barriers like child marriage, or structural barriers like child marriage, they're going to, maybe there's different aspects of agency that affect the ability to push a marriage later versus the agency that a young woman would need to, have protected sex out, while she's still in school. Are those different combinations of agency and power and, resources? It's really complicated. I don't think there's a single answer. We're still, I'm definitely on the more research needed side of this one. Sorry.
Thanks, Nicole. Laura, your thoughts?
Yeah, I always feel like I'm muddying the waters a bit, but I just feel like it's really complicated. And I know in some of our work, we just haven't had clear-cut results, which makes the discussion around it difficult. So I'm thinking about the Planet Girls project, where they look at the relationship between their sort of agency and gender norms change program and outcomes related to employment and education. And it wasn't clear cut. I think there were differences by the different age groups that they looked at, as well as by the districts. One was rural, one was urban. So it wasn't like all the girls across all the ages, both rural and urban, had these incredible changes in education and employment. It was complicated. In some groups there was, in some groups there wasn't. Similarly, in our evaluation of the child marriage empowerment programming in Malawi, we had complicated results. It wasn't that the arm that had the girls empowerment programming just skyrocketed across all of the outcomes related to child marriage, beliefs, and sexual and reproductive health. It was just more complicated. So I think that really speaks to how complex this issue is. And it goes back to my point about multi-component programming. It's not just, we got to skill build with the girls and just focus on individual. We have to focus on individual and the enabling environment. And even that is still producing complicated results. So that was one point. And I think another point too is just remembering that agency and empowerment are both relational concepts. So, you know, a girl has multiple relationships in her life. She has a relationship with a husband or a boyfriend. She has a relationship with her parents. She has a relationship with teachers and other community leaders. And so agency and relationships might look different agency might look different depending on what relationship we're talking about. So just another point to make, and something about what we need to consider as we're continuing to work in the space.
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura. I think, you know, the sort of tidbit that I am taking away from this discussion, you know, is the importance of really investing holistically in girls. I think, you know, the evidence base is going to continue to grow. For those of you who are interested, I'll plug again the session we're doing on Thursday, which shares some of Amplify Girls' own research on the question of promising practices related to improving girls' agency. And we'll talk a bit more about the research we're doing, both around expanding the validation of this agency survey, as well as trying to investigate the causal relationship between agency and education, to begin to answer some of these questions. But in the meantime, I just really wanted to thank all of you for sharing your expertise with us. I think, you know, these conversations are incredibly important to have, especially as we continue to look to collaborate more, build momentum for a girls' agency agenda, and really bring folks along to understanding that this is an important investment, even as we're figuring out the details of how best to measure, how best to document. You know, there are things that we can know from the ground are working, and being open to hearing those case studies, to qualitative evidence that helps us in the meantime to really sort through how to make these investments work, I think is really important. So thanks to all of our panelists for being with us today. We're so grateful for your time and expertise. We look forward to continuing the conversation on girls' agency on Thursday. For now, I'm actually going to pass the mic back to Anika, Amplify Girls' Head of Advocacy, who's going to help us close the conversation today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Aubrey, for that insightful panel. And I am very grateful to the panelists as well. Many key points coming out of today's conversation. Just some highlights. Linda said, we need to be more intentional about girls' agency. Investing in the human side of girls' interventions translates to the economic empowerment of girls. And we cannot reiterate enough, with Nicole also saying that we need better metrics to measure the impact of girls' programs on and actually, you know, use these metrics. As we wind up this conversation, I want to bring in Julie Diallo from UNFPA SRO, who will be closing the conversation. Julie is the gender specialist for UNFPA and previously worked for Oxfam, leading the work on violence against women and girls at the global level. And prior to this, she worked for UN Women Headquarters in Mozambique. UNFPA SARO just launched a report, Seeing the Unseen, where Girls Agency featured heavily as a recommendation to avert teenage pregnancy. Now, moving from research to action, Julie, what would be your takeaway and call to action on stakeholders on this call, and why prominently feature Girls Agency in your recommendations? Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anika, and also really thanks a lot, colleagues. And I just want to say thank you to Amplify Girls for really creating this important space, because I think it was really great to learn, exchange, and reflect. And I think the chat box, it's really show how it was very interactive discussion, and also a very needed discussion. And then I also want to say thanks a lot for the great speaker, really, for sharing the knowledge, all those research and those good practices, and really bringing Africa, Asia, so really like Latin America, and really bringing like experience from all over, which I think it's very interesting. So for me, really, in terms of takeaway, and I took a lot of note, and Annika will, it's kind of really similar. So for me, there is two things, really like the first thing about the intentionality about a girls' agency. So I think for me, that was really, really important. The second point, it's really like taking girls where they are. So really like looking at the different age group to make sure that we tailor intervention that are really responding to the needs of girls, young women, adolescents, where they are at the moment. And also, like, very important point for me, the need to invest in evidence, to invest on M&E, really like looking at implementation research, because this is very critical to invest on that if we want to replicate and upscale. And we really need to replicate and upscale, because coming from the UNFPA, we have very few years to deliver on the SDG agenda. So we really need to accelerate. And then also the two last point, it was really like about having the holistic approach and the multi-sectoral approach. And the last point, it's really like about that I really take away, it takes time. And I think that was very important, the point that the colleagues from Population Council, I think, said that, okay, if we want to see whether it works, we need to go back to see women at a later age, whether to see whether they are working, how is it? So really like looking at changing a little bit the way that we do in terms of really recognizing that it takes time and that we need to go back to see if what we have done work. So for me, the last hour and a half has been really quite inspiring, but I just want to say a little bit about UNFPA, because, you know, girls, adolescent and women empowerment, it's really at the center of UNFPA mandate and action. And this is really illustrated in our new strategic plan 2022, and also on in our new flagship report of 2022. So the state of the world population that really focused on unintended pregnancy. And what it's really show, that report, and I think the linkage with empowerment is so important there. It's really show that today in country where we have data, nearly a quarter of all women are unable to say no to sex. Nearly a quarter are unable to make decisions about their own health care. Nearly 10% are unable to make decisions about contraception. And we know that sexual activity without the use of effective contraception through choice or coercion is the predominant cause of unintended pregnancy. And so if we look at East Africa, we see that we have an estimated 47% of pregnancy that were unintended between 2015 and 2019, and nearly half ended in abortion. If we look at Southern Africa, 65% of pregnancy in the same period were unintended, and 36% ended in abortion. So really, like, what our report shows us is that empowerment, it's at the center of women body autonomy and women decision-making over the body. And we know that when we look at adolescent, girls, adolescent, young women, we know that they are particularly at risk of unintended pregnancy. Because if we look at Africa, East and Southern Africa, we have very high rate of adolescent birth. So for example, for East and Southern Africa, it's 95 per 1,000 girls aged 15 to 19, compared to a global rate of 41 per mil girl. So it's really show that in a region, this is really like a crisis that we really need to attend. And empowerment, it's very critical to make sure that we tackle unintended pregnancy, specifically among young girls. And because we know the impact of unintended pregnancy in terms of like going to school, and we know that the impact on the future of girls, obviously, when they cannot go back to school. So this is a little bit what I wanted to share from the report, but also something for me that I also wanted to kind of hear a little bit more in our next discussion. It's also, and I would be really interested to hear a little bit also of the role of social movement and if young feminist led coalition to really look at empowerment and what is the linkages between social movement, between being part of a network and empowerment, and what is the impact in the life of the girls. So for me, really, today it was an important platform because it's really pushed us to look at how we can work differently, how we need to invest in research, how we need to make sure that we have intervention that really respond to the need and the demand of girls and young women, to really make sure that they can have body autonomy and the ability to make informed decision about their sexual reproductive health and right. So thank you for this. It's really pushed us to kind of change the way that we look at empowerment, and we need to do that because we really need to accelerate our effort and our investment. And maybe the last things that I want to say is to end by a quote from one of my favorite writers, who is Audre Lorde, and she said, "Change is the immediate responsibility of each of us, wherever and however we are standing in whatever arena we choose." And I think this is a little bit of a call for action for us to change the way that we do empowerment for all of us who are here as practitioners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that insightful conversation and submission. It is important that we realize that, we can influence the change that we want to see. And I've just seen in the chat, we have posted the link to the report. Please take a look at that link that UNFPA developed, Seeing the Unseen, recommending agency as a key tool to prevent teenage pregnancy. Now, moving this conversation forward, Amplify Girls will be hosting a monthly stakeholder girls agency workshop in order to mobilize key gender practitioners towards building girls agency, resourcing, mobilizing around it, and centering it in girls' conversations moving forward. The link to the sign up will be placed in the chat. Just look in the chat and we'll be able to convene from now on moving forward. In addition, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of event 1 of the symposium of our agency symposium. On Thursday, the 15th, we will launch the research results from the Amplify Girls longitudinal study. And this is a conversation you do not want to miss. It will be moderated by Erin from Echidna and delivered by Dr. Brenda and Dr. Obrin Siddle. You do not want to miss this out. To get the research, please check in the chat. There is a link to the research itself so that you can interact with it ahead of our Thursday meeting. We hope to see you all soon. And details of the Thursday meeting are on the screen with the links to the dates and etc. So thank you so much, everyone. Please look in the chat for the necessary links for you all. And thank you so much for joining. We will now be closing up the session. Thank you for staying with us to the end, and see you on Thursday.